A very prominent evolutionist, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book called The God Delusion. It's kind of the reverse of our title tonight. The book proposes there is no need for a God, that creation is too complex to have been created by a God, and that religion is just a social construct made by man. Unsurprisingly, as Bible believers, we do not accept these arguments. Our appeal tonight will be to another book. It's not called The Evolution Delusion, it's called the Bible. But our lecture will challenge these 3 points. The God Delusion says that religion is a social construct made by man, but we will see that evolution is the latest in a line of social constructs made by man which attempt to avoid acknowledging God. The God Delusion says that creation is too complex to have been created by God, whereas we'll see creation is so wonderful we do God a disservice by saying he was not smart enough. The God Delusion says there is no need for a God, but God provides a promise of life and peace. Now, if you're at all familiar with the Bible, you would know that a large part of it is focused on the idea of idolatry. There are countless instances in the Bible where people have turned away from God and created idols. But the real question is, why did they do that? If you'll turn with me to Genesis chapter 4, we'll see our first instance of idolatry in the Bible. A bit of background, though, to the story of Genesis chapter 4. In Genesis 1, we have the account of the creation of the earth and all the animals, plants, water, sun and moon, everything. God also created a man and a woman, Adam and Eve. They were placed in a garden called the Garden of Eden, and then were told that they could eat any fruit from any of the trees in the garden. Any except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then the serpent in the garden tricked Eve. She ate the fruit and then gave it to Adam as well. This was direct disobedience to what God had told them to do. God had told them that if they did eat of the tree, that they would die. Then they realized that they were naked. They were aware of their sin, and they tried to cover their shame with fig leaves by sewing them into aprons. This wasn't enough to cover their sin, and so they hid from the angels in the garden. Then, when they were called to God, he uncovered their sin and gave them a sheepskin to wear and told them to leave the garden. A sheep was sacrificed to cover their sin. The entrance of the garden was then barred so that they could not go back in. So, after that, in Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve have 2 sons, whose names were Cain and Abel. Cain was the older and Abel the younger. And it tells us in verse 1 to 5, "And Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from Yahweh. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto Yahweh. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And Yahweh had respect unto Abel, and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." So here we see that Abel understood the principle God had been trying to show them. At the time, God wanted an animal sacrifice to acknowledge the sin of a person. Adam and Eve had had their sin, or at least the awareness of their sin, covered with an animal skin. However, Cain did not understand, and when he saw that God didn't respect his offering, Cain became very angry. But then God gives him another chance in verse 6 and 7. Cain, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So what's going on here? Cain has made an offering that is not accepted. He's angry. But here we learn a bit about the character of God. God is giving Cain another chance to obey his wishes and to sacrifice an animal. But Cain didn't see that as necessary. He had offered something that he was proud of, the fruits of his labour. And from his point of view, God should be more than happy with that. And here we come to the crux of the matter. Cain did not want to do what God wanted him to do. He had other ideas. He had his own ideas about worship. This is the underlying theme of idolatry. There was no physical idol in this story, but the concept of idolatry is all about doing something that we want to do and justifying it to ourselves and those around us, instead of just doing what God has told us to do. Cain knew that God wanted an animal sacrifice, and yet he went and sacrificed the produce that he had grown. Now we find out what happens when we prioritize our own ideas above God's. Because of his mindset of doing whatever he saw was right, Cain ends up killing Abel. In verse 8, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So this mindset of not doing what God wants leads us to doing wrong things. The outcome of this story is that Cain is banished, and he and his family then live their own violent lives without the positive impact of worshipping the true God, who is a God of second chances, a God of forgiveness. Let's note the ideology of Cain. Let's have a look at another example. Remember, we're observing that through history, the Bible tells us a story of what happens when people decide they want to do their own thing. We've proposed that this is the whole idea of idolatry, an ideology that lets us all do what we decide to do. In this next example, the idolatry is much more physically obvious, but what's also obvious is that the whole group of this people wanted to do their own thing, and they invented a God that would let them do what they want. A new religion, a new social construct to forget what God had told them to do. This example we'll look at is the exodus of the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So again, to give a bit of background first of all, the Israelites were slaves in the land of Egypt, and God sent Moses to them to be their deliverer. Moses told Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that God had said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Now, Pharaoh liked having slaves to do all his work for him, so he refused, and God sent plagues and messages over and over and over again to him, but he continued to refuse. God sent 10 plagues on the land of Egypt, and the plagues in order were: water becomes blood, a plague of frogs, a plague of lice, a plague of flies, livestock disease, a plague of boils, a plague of hail, locusts, darkness, and finally slaughter of the firstborn children. After this final plague, Pharaoh agrees, and he sends Israel out. As they are journeying out of Egypt to go to the promised land, basically the territory of modern-day Israel, they come to the Red Sea, and they don't know how to get to the other side. The people then see the armies of Pharaoh chasing them. The people panic, but Moses tells them not to be afraid, to stand still and see the salvation of God. Then Moses lifts up the rod he had in his hand, and the waters of the Red Sea split in two, allowing the children of Israel to walk on dry land. And as all the people came to the other side, and the Egyptian chariots drove down into the same path the Israelites had escaped by, the water came crashing down, killing every one of the Egyptians. The Israelites, all safely on the other side of the sea, rejoiced. They sang songs to God. Later, they went to a mountain in the area called Mount Sinai, and Moses was called up to the mountain to talk to God, to receive the law and the pattern for the tabernacle, which was like a temple. He also received the 10 Commandments, written on 2 stone tablets. Now he was up in the mountain for 40 days. And during these 40 days, this is where it gets interesting from our point of view. So let's recap. A slave nation had been dramatically rescued by powerful signs described as being of God by the prophet Moses. They had escaped slavery, escaped being recaptured by the sea miraculously being opened and allowing their escape, and then closing, causing the destruction of their enemies. All this was described to them as the work of God. Now, if ever there was a time when a society couldn't escape the proof of the existence of a God with far higher capability than all humanity, this was it. This was the God who made them, gave them life, saved them from slavery and recapture by powerful miracles. And look what happens. If you'll come to Exodus chapter 32, we'll read from verse 1. The people were down at the foot of the mountain, camped there. And verse 1 says, "And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, the brother of Moses, and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him." So after 40 days, they were able to forget all the things God had done for them in taking them out of the land of Egypt. All 10 of the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, everything. Not only forget what God had done for them, but they said to Aaron, "This man that brought us out of Egypt." They were trying to remove the influence of God by suggesting that Moses himself had taken them out of Egypt. It wasn't God that had brought them out, it was Moses. And here's the insightful thing. What was their plan of action? It was to make their own gods. And they were going to follow that God back to Egypt. They were going to choose how they were going to worship. You see how that goes hand in hand. When you make your own God, you get to choose what's involved in following that God. Like Cain, he wanted to do his own thing, so he decided to disregard God's instruction. So, back to the story, Aaron got them to take all their golden jewelry and to give it to him. He then melted it down and made it into a golden calf. These people had already gone against what God had told them to do in that they had made an idol. And then it says in verse 6, "They rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play." We know actually from verse 25 that they were naked. In verse 5, we can see Aaron's justification of all this. He says that this immoral party that the people are having is a feast celebrating God. This is the harm in idolatry. The thought of justifying your actions based off of a God that you have created. In other words, a man-made religion is merely a social construct. But note this, that doesn't mean there isn't a real God or that there isn't a true way to worship him. One final example we'll look at tonight is in our reading of tonight, Jeremiah chapter 10. This is a message from God to the people of Israel. God says in verse 2 to 3 of Jeremiah chapter 10, "Learn not the way of the heathen. Be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them." This is God telling them not to worship the sun, the moon, and like many of the nations around them. But reading on, "For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good." God here is telling the people that idols are absolutely worthless. They can't affect your life at all. They can't speak, they have to be carried around. You don't need to be scared of them, God says, because they can't do evil. They can't even do good. Then this is contrasted in verse 6 to 7. "Forasmuch as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. Who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee doth it appertain. Forasmuch as among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms there is none like unto thee." Here is the amazing power of God. There is none like God. His name is great in might. A similar thing is mentioned in Isaiah 44. It mentions in almost a humorous way. It says that a man goes down, cuts a tree, and he says, "He burneth part thereof in the fire. With part thereof he eateth flesh. He roasteth roast, and is satisfied. Yea, he warmeth himself, and saith, Aha, I am warm, I have seen the fire. And the residue thereof he maketh a god, even his graven image. He falleth down unto it, and worshippeth it, and prayeth unto it, and saith, Deliver me, for thou art my God." The description God then gives is that they don't think about the fact that he's burnt part of it, cooked some food with part of it, and then makes an idol with part of it and reveres it as his God. But back in Jeremiah, in verse 8, we're told something absolutely crucial. "The idols are brutish and foolish. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. The teaching or ideology of idolatry is vanity, doing whatever I want or whatever I think is right." We can see that in the case of Cain, God gave him another chance to do what was right. But Cain only wanted to do what he wanted to do. In the case of the children of Israel, they thought it was only a man who brought them out of Egypt, and so they could make their own gods and praise them however they saw fit. From the beginning of time, people have preferred to create and invent their own paths and commands rather than accept the power and existence of God. So we shouldn't be too surprised that this idea has been happening even more recently in the minds of scientists. The concept of evolution is relatively modern. For most of history, mankind has gravitated towards the idea that a god or a number of gods created everything. For most of the time, up until the mid-1700s, it was believed that a god made the world. This was because religion governed nearly every aspect of a person's life. The law was based around religion. That was the mainstream view, with some people throughout the Greek philosophical period and the Renaissance telling of some theory, but nobody believed them. In the mid-1700s to the early 1800s, a number of things change in the thoughts of humans. There are a number of revolutions that happen at this stage. In England, the Industrial Revolution began in approximately 1760. This brought many people out of the country, where they lived off the land, and into the cities, where they worked in absolutely appalling conditions. They were making all these inventions to make life easier, more enjoyable, and more independent. There was also the French Revolution. The people of France had had enough of being ruled by tyrannical rulers who could not care for their people in the least. They put their foot down. They wanted to get rid of inherited power. They didn't want the rich to stay rich and the poor to stay poor. They didn't want the ruler of the country to be chosen simply because his father had been ruler of the country. They promoted liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty refers to the freedom of individuals to act according to their own will. It emphasizes the importance of personal freedom and resistance to oppression. Equality ensures that all citizens are equal in regard to the law, disregarding their status, wealth, or birth. It makes the society more merit-based and eliminated inherited privileges. Fraternity refers to solidarity and unity, camaraderie amongst the people, citizens working together to build a better society. I don't know if you were thinking about the examples of idolatry as I read out those definitions, but idolatry almost ticks every one of those boxes. The concepts of liberty, equality, and fraternity themselves are not the problem, but it is the extremist approach that the people had. They were wanting to make everybody agree with them, to change everything about authority, and to get rid of God. It was at this time, amongst all these radical changes in the world, that the first evolutionary theories arose. Georges Buffon suggested that species were able to adapt and to change over time, adapt to environmental conditions changing. Until he had come along, most people viewed species as being static, unchanging. Then, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck suggested a theory known as Lamarckism, a theory of evolution based on the principle that physical changes in organisms during their lifetime, such as a greater development of an organ or part through increased use, could be transmitted to their offspring. For example, the first giraffe had wanted to get to the leaves higher on a tree. So it strained and stretched, and because of this habit, they developed slightly longer legs and neck, which then their children had a slightly longer neck, etc. And it goes on, it repeats. The children then strained, their children then strained, until we have the giraffe we have today. However, if this were true, then a builder who has rough hands and is very muscular, when he has a child, the child's arms would be unusually large and its hands unusually rough. If not at birth, then at some later point, even without the excessive use of its arms. So far, all these theories, although wrong, can still be true with a creator in mind. These theories speak about the adaptation of species, not the changing of them. These theories so far deal with the development and adaptation of species, which we know does happen. But then Charles Darwin proposed his theory of natural selection. There are four main principles in his theory: variation, struggle for existence, survival of the fittest, and common descent. Variation is that individuals within a species can have specific traits which are then able to be inherited. We can see that here Darwin largely agreed with the theory proposed by Lamarck. A struggle for existence is where there may be a conflict, whether within the species or impacted by an external species. This may be a lack of resources in a certain area, or simply not enough room to move. This is closely linked with survival of the fittest. Only the strongest survive. If there isn't enough food, those who are the best at hunting or finding the food are obviously going to be the ones that survive. Common descent. Over time, these processes led to the evolution of new species from common ancestors. We could go further into the study of evolution, but I think we can stop there because of common descent. If we now believe that we have found a way that everything living that we see on the earth has come to be from one single ancestor, known as Luca, or last universal common ancestor, the scientific community no longer requires God. We can boil it all down to time and chance. And as soon as we took God out of creation, we take God out of everything. Richard Dawkins suggested the religion was a man-made thing, and yet he then went on to suggest a theory totally proposed by man. God had shown all of them the things he wanted, the things he had done to create the earth. In Romans 1, verse 28 to 32, it says, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them." It says that they didn't want God in their heads, so they went and became all those things, even though they knew the judgment of God and knew that because they did those things, they should die. They enjoyed them. They boasted about them. So, in summary on our first point, from the very beginning, people have been inventing their own social construct, their own worship, their own religion, their own ideology for the purpose of ignoring God. Evolution is just the next ideology to propose the same thing. I thought that now we would spend the time remaining looking at how truly wonderful the idea of creation is. We can see all around us the different types of animals, plants, fungi. And on that, I thought we'd look at 3 examples of the incredible hand of God. The Dawkins view is that creation is too hard, too complex, too amazing to have been the work of a creator. Well, there is a Creator. He has made amazing things, and we want to gasp at those amazing things He's done. We'll look at an example, one in the water, one in land, and one in the sky. The one in the water we're going to look at now is absolutely fascinating. The splash tetrafish. The way this fish cares for its unborn young is amazing. During the breeding season, these fish, which live in the rivers of South America, a male will choose a location where there is some foliage hanging over the river. Once he has attracted a mate to the spot, both of them jump at the same time and cling to the leaf with their fins, where they can stay for up to 10 seconds. The female then lays around 6 to 10 eggs, and they are instantly fertilized by the male. They then fall back into the water to repeat this process again and again until there is around 100 to 200 eggs. They do this so that no predator can come and eat the 200 odd eggs before they can even hatch. Many other species would then see this as their job done. But not the male splash tetrafish. He stays nearby to make sure to keep them moist. He splashes around 38 times an hour, and the eggs can take up to 72 hours to hatch. So that's up to 2,736 splashes that this fish has to make. Eventually, the eggs hatch, and he splashes his children back into the water. What an amazing creature. Evolution has no answers for behaviors like this. The two fish coordinating their jumping. They have to jump at exactly the same time. The mere thought of laying the eggs out of the water, and then the continued splashing so that all the babies survive. This is clearly a representation of incredibly complicated behavior, none of it even remotely occurring in other fish types. The land animal we will look at is the camel. There are many things that the camel has been given by God to survive and to flourish in the environment that they are in. There are 3 different species of camel. They are dromedaries with 1 hump, and the Bactrians and wild Bactrians, which each have 2 humps. I'll mostly focus on the dromedaries for tonight, just because it can be a bit confusing switching between the 2 or the 3. Because of the desert environment that they live in, they are often subjected to terrible sandstorms. To combat this, they have an invisible eyelid that they use to protect their eyes and yet can still see. They also have very long eyelashes and very hairy ears, so that the sand from the storm can't get in their ears either. These camels also have the ability to close their nostrils to stop their noses being filled with sand. They can also last up to 15 days without water, whereas us humans can last about 3. The reason that they are able to do this is partially because of the hump. Contrary to popular belief, the hump is not full of water, but instead is completely a fat store. This is another reason as to why they can last such a long time without drinking water, is because their kidneys are far more efficient than ours. This means that they get as much hydration from the water as possible. They can also drink 200 litres of water in as little as 3 minutes. The hump's fat store is able to be converted into both water and also energy for when there is little to no food in the area. This allows the camel to survive for up to 5 months without food. The camel's foot is also perfectly designed for the type of terrain they live in. They have very wide feet that help them not to sink into the sand because their weight is more spread out. They have a large ball of fat underneath on their foot, which stops the camel from getting burned on the hot desert sand. The camels also have thick fur coats that might seem silly for them to have in such arid environments, but these coats are actually crucial. These thick layers insulate them from the harsh sun, and then in the night, when the temperatures plummet, they maintain the temperature of the camel. Their digestion is similar to that of a cow. Cows are known as ruminants, and so camels are known as pseudo-ruminants. Because where a cow has 4-chamber stomach, camels have a 3-chamber stomach. The first compartment, or C1, is the largest chamber, and this is where most of the microbial fermentation happens. It has sac-like structures which are designed to increase the surface area inside the chamber, which allows for more breakdown of the vegetation that the camel eats. The mucus lining inside the chamber is also specifically designed to absorb water. C2, or the second compartment, is much smaller, and this is where most of the fatty acids are absorbed, a major source of energy for the camel. C3 functions similarly to the true stomach of ruminants. This is where the enzymes actually digest the contents of the chamber. This is where gastric acids and enzymes break down the proteins. The whole digestive system of the camel is designed to conserve water, allowing it to be even more efficient with the water it consumes. Now, the air creature we will look at, I had never heard of before. The hoatzin is an absolutely fascinating bird. They're approximately the size of chickens and are native to South America, specifically the Amazon and Orinoco River basins. They make their nests over the water, and when predators are incoming, the parents quickly leave and leave the young to protect themselves. But because the nest is built above water, the babies jump out of the nest, and it turns out they're excellent swimmers. They wait until the threat has passed, and then they have tiny claws, 2 on each side of the wing, to climb back up to the nest. While the adults can fly, because of the unique way they digest their food, they can only fly clumsily and for short distances, similar to chickens. The diet of a hoatzin is almost exclusively leafy greens, with an occasional fruit or flower thrown in the mix. Because of this herbivorous diet, the hoatzin also has to ferment its food, similar to the system we talked about earlier with the camel. It has a number of compartments in its system as well. The compartment that is where the fermentation happens is called the crop. Now, one downside to this fermentation process is the smell associated with the fermentation, giving the bird its nickname of skunk bird. This also comes in handy in terms of predation. Because of its smell, predators will generally leave it alone. But because of this large crop, because of the large space that the crop takes up its breastbone is of a slightly different shape to most birds. On the left, we can see the breastbone of a hoatzin, and the right, a breastbone of a normal bird. The normal bird's breastbone is much larger, and therefore can have much stronger muscles attached to it, enabling it to fly better. A more interesting and poignant fact about this bird is that scientists have no idea as to what animal this evolved from. In fact, this animal is so unique, it has its own order. For those who don't know the breakdown of life into categories, it goes the order of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species. So, for example, us, as humans, are in the kingdom of Animalia, which means that we're not plants, bacteria, or a fungus. We are then of the phylum of Chordata, which refers to the spinal cord, or whether a creature is vertebrate or not. Our class is then Mammalia, as we are mammals. Primates is about flexible limbs and social characteristics. Hominidae is the great apes, which includes humans. And then Homo and Homo sapiens, which is our scientific name. Now, a reminder that this categorization was invented by those who believe in evolution, and so humans have been placed in the same family as the ape. Hoatzins, however, have a much more interesting scientific description. They are animals and vertebrates, so those are the same for them. Obviously, they are birds, hence the aves as the class name. However, their order, Opisthocomiforms, their family, Opisthocomidae, their genus and species, Opisthocomus hoatzin, are very similar. This is because the hoatzin is so different to other birds that it has its own order. There are 41 different orders in the aves class, ranging from types of pelicans to ducks, to ostriches to pigeons. But the hoatzin has its own. There is no other bird like it. There's no eastern hoatzin. There's no red-plumed hoatzin. There is only the hoatzin. The hoatzin is clearly a sign of the Creator. Otherwise, there would be birds that are similar to it. This bird was made to be unique in almost every way. So let's pull a few things together. We started by showing that humanity has always tried to create thinking and systems which are against God. In the Bible, these are known as idolatry. And the latest in the line of these idolatries is the theory of evolution. And there is one thing that idolatry and the different theories of evolution all have in common. Believers in these ideas, when they reach the end of their lives, they die and stay dead. They may choose to believe that the earth came to be during a series of random mutations and adaptations, but they still die. In fact, their ideology of evolution requires it. In contrast, God is a creative mastermind that is able to create life, and life in so many intricate and amazing plants and systems. And God has promised to us something almost unimaginable. Let's read John 3, verses 15 to 16. That whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. When we believe in Jesus, we can have eternal life. God loved the world so much, the world that he created and everything in it, that he was willing to give his only Son for it. But this isn't only going to be a change of people at this time. The whole earth is going to be transformed into something absolutely incredible. We're told of that future day in Isaiah chapter 35, if you turn there. In Isaiah 35, we're told of what God will do to the earth. Verse 1 and 2 say, "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice, and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly, and rejoice even with joy and with singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God." God will turn all the dry, arid areas of the world into places where roses grow and blossom abundantly. Everyone will rejoice and sing and see the glory of God. So God is going to change the world into a sanctuary. But that's not all. Let's keep reading in verse 3 to 6. "Strengthen ye the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, Be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert." It says that God will come and save us, that all the blind will be able to see, that all the deaf will be able to hear, that the lame will be jumping like deer, and the dumb will not only talk but sing. In verse 9 it says, there won't be lions or any ravenous beasts. It will be so peaceful that in other passages it says the lion will lay down with the lamb, and the lion won't eat the lamb. Finally, in verse 10, "And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion, with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away." All sadness, all sorrow, all tears will be gone. In that day, creation will be as God intended it to be, a beautiful display of his power. Tonight, we've seen that God isn't a delusion. Evolution is the delusion. Throughout history, humans have been inventing ways of getting rid of God, from making idols and then making up the ways to worship them, to inventing a way that the earth formed by chance and then by acting how we please. But God has invited all of us to a day where all of that will be wiped away. There will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more sadness. He wants us to believe in his Son so that we will be there. And I can't wait to see you all there.